The golden lights of the Westbrook Hotel's grand ballroom bounced off crystal chandeliers, casting a warm glow over the charity gala. 23-year-old Sofia Rivera adjusted her black vest, smoothed down her white shirt, and balanced a tray of champagne flutes with practiced ease. Her feet already ached in the new shoes she'd bought from a thrift shop, but she kept a gentle smile fixed on her face. This catering job paid double her usual rate, and every extra dollar mattered. Remember, don't make eye contact for too long, whispered May, another server who had been working these high society events for years. Rich folks get weird when they think the help is staring. Sofia nodded, though she couldn't help stealing glances at the guests around her. Men in tailored suits worth more than her semester's tuition chatted with women dripping in jewels that could pay off her family's medical bills. The contrast between their world and hers felt almost dizzying. As she weaved between guests offering champagne, Sofia caught snippets of conversation about vacation homes, stock portfolios, and private jets. These discussions seemed as foreign to her as speaking another language. Just that morning she had been counting coins to make sure she had enough for the bus fare to get to this job, after her morning classes at the city's music college. I heard the Parker boy might actually show up tonight, an older woman in a midnight blue gown said to her companion. Imagine that. He hardly makes appearances these days, too busy with that tech company of his. 29 and already worth billions, her friend replied with a hint of envy. My son is 32 and still asking for money to fund his startup ideas. They laughed, taking fresh glasses from Sofia's tray without acknowledging her presence. She moved on, used to being invisible in these spaces. Near the bar, a harried-looking woman in a crisp pantsuit was having an intense phone conversation. Sofia recognized her as Diane, the event organizer she'd met during the pre-event briefing. What do you mean he's not coming? The program specifically advertised a piano performance. Diane pinched the bridge of her nose. Half these donors came expecting music. The Children's Hospital fundraising goals will suffer without the entertainment we promised. Sofia lingered nearby, pretending to arrange napkins while listening. Music had been her passion and escape since childhood. Even now, despite working 3 jobs to support herself and her younger siblings, she practiced keyboard whenever she could steal a moment. Her scholarship at the music college covered tuition but nothing else, and after her parents' accident 2 years ago, responsibilities had piled onto her young shoulders. Well, find someone else. Anyone. Diane ended the call and muttered under her breath. Where am I supposed to find a classical pianist at 8 in the evening? The event coordinator spotted Sofia hovering and snapped, Do you need something? No, ma'am, sorry. Sofia hurried away, embarrassed at being caught eavesdropping. For the next hour, she continued serving drinks and collecting empty glasses, but her mind kept returning to the piano problem. In the corner of the ballroom stood a beautiful grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the lights, waiting for a performer who would never arrive. During her break, while the other servers huddled in the staff area sharing cigarettes and complaints about rude guests, Sofia found herself drawn to the empty service hallway. She pulled out her phone and searched for information about the evening's guests. If she was going to keep working these events to pay for school, she might as well learn about the world she was serving. Her eyes widened when an article about Ethan Parker appeared. The young tech billionaire rarely attended social events, preferring to work behind the scenes at his company. But what caught her attention wasn't his wealth or success. It was a small detail mentioned halfway through the article. Before founding his technology empire, he had studied at Juilliard. Sofia's heart raced as a wild idea formed in her mind. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. Don't be stupid, she whispered to herself. People like her didn't approach people like him. There were invisible but rigid boundaries between their worlds. Break's over, called the catering manager, and Sofia reluctantly returned to work. As she re-entered the ballroom with a fresh tray, she nearly dropped it when she spotted him. Ethan Parker stood near a pillar, slightly removed from the crowd, observing the room with quiet intensity. He was younger looking than she expected, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and a face that seemed more suited to a university library than a boardroom. Unlike the other men who peacocked around in flashy watches and loud conversations, he wore his obvious wealth with understated elegance. Sofia watched as several guests approached him, their body language shifting to something more eager, more ingratiating, He responded politely but briefly to each, maintaining a bubble of personal space that few seemed able to penetrate. "That's him," whispered May, suddenly appearing beside her, "the golden boy genius. They say he donated $5 million to the children's hospital last year without any publicity. Didn't even show up to the ribbon-cutting ceremony with his name on the new wing." Sophia nodded, still watching him. There was something almost sad about the way he stood apart, nursing a single drink, checking his watch occasionally. Near the piano, Diane was having another heated conversation with the hotel manager, gesturing emphatically toward the instrument. The evening's program would begin soon, and the musical portion was clearly still unresolved. Before she could second-guess herself, Sophia handed her tray to a startled May. "Cover for me for 2 minutes?" "What? No. Where are you going?" But Sophia was already moving away, heart pounding so loudly she was sure others could hear it. She approached Ethan Parker from the side, trying not to draw attention from other guests. Up close, she noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion around his eyes. "Excuse me, Mr. Parker?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He turned, mild surprise registering on his face at being addressed by waitstaff. "Yes?" Now that she had his attention, doubt flooded through her. This was crazy. She would be fired for sure. But the thought of that beautiful piano sitting unplayed while the hospital lost donations strengthened her resolve. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir. I'm Sophia." She took a deep breath. "I know this is incredibly forward, but I heard there's a problem with tonight's program. The pianist canceled, and I also heard," she hesitated, "that you studied at Juilliard before you started your company." His expression shifted from polite disinterest to genuine surprise. "You've been researching me?" Heat rushed to her cheeks. "Not exactly. I'm studying music at City College, and I follow news about Juilliard graduates. It was mentioned in an article once." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "That was a lifetime ago. The event organizer is desperate," Sophia continued, the words tumbling out now. "Many donors came specifically for the musical program, and the Children's Hospital might not meet its fundraising goal without it. Would you consider playing just one piece?" She became acutely aware of her worn shoes, her server's uniform, and the enormous gap between their social positions. Several nearby guests had noticed their conversation, watching with undisguised curiosity. A server had breached protocol by approaching a VIP guest directly, and not just any guest, but Ethan Parker himself. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You care a lot about this fundraiser for someone who's just working the event. My brother spent 3 months in that children's hospital after our parents' accident," she said quietly. "The staff there gave him more than just medical care. They gave him hope when our world was falling apart." Something in his eyes softened and he glanced toward the piano. "I haven't played publicly in years. But you still play privately, don't you?" She noticed the almost imperceptible calluses on his fingertips, similar to her own. Before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. "Sophia, what do you think you're doing?" Diane, the event coordinator, had spotted them and was approaching rapidly, her face a mask of professional horror. Behind her, Sophia's manager looked equally mortified. "I am so sorry for this intrusion, Mr. Parker," Diane said, placing herself between them. "She'll be removed from the event immediately." "That won't be necessary," Ethan said calmly. Diane faltered. "Sir?" "She was just telling me about your pianist problem." He turned his attention back to Sophia. "You said you're studying music?" Sophia nodded, acutely aware of the growing audience around them. "Yes, piano and composition. What happened next would change the course of many lives, though no one in that ballroom could have predicted it." Ethan Parker, the young man who had reshaped an entire industry before his 30th birthday, looked directly at Sofia Rivera, the waitress who could barely afford bus fare, and asked a question that bridged their worlds. "Do you play as well? Do you play as well?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia felt dozens of eyes on her, including Diane's horrified gaze and her manager's silent fury. She should have backed away, apologized for the interruption, and disappeared into the background where servers belonged. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a spark of genuine interest breaking through his carefully maintained reserve. He glanced at the grand piano sitting unused in the corner of the ballroom, then back at Sophia. "I haven't performed publicly in years, he said thoughtfully. But I will tonight on one condition. Diane stepped forward eagerly. Anything, Mr. Parker. The Foundation would be incredibly honored. That she joins me. He gestured toward Sophia. For a duet, a startled murmur rippled through the onlookers. Sophia stood frozen, certain she had misheard him. Her manager's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I don't understand, Diane stammered. You want to play with the waitstaff? With Sophia, Ethan corrected firmly. Who studies piano and composition at City College and who cared enough about your fundraiser to risk her job by approaching me. Sophia found her voice at last. Mr. Parker, I couldn't possibly— Ethan, he interrupted. And yes, you could. Unless you were exaggerating about your musical abilities. There was a challenge in his eyes now, alongside something else she couldn't quite read. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps amusement at disrupting the rigid social hierarchy of the evening. I wasn't exaggerating, she replied, lifting her chin slightly. His mouth curved into a genuine smile, the first of the evening. Then it settled. He turned to the increasingly flustered event coordinator. Diane, isn't it? We'll need 10 minutes to prepare. I assume the program notes can be adjusted? Diane looked like she might faint. Of course, Mr. Parker. We'll announce a short delay for the program while you prepare. She shot Sophia a look that clearly communicated they would have words later, then hurried off to speak with the MC. Sophia's manager stepped close, hissing under his breath, What have you done? This isn't some college recital, girl. I'm sorry, I was just trying to help with the pianist problem. By volunteering yourself? Do you have any idea what will happen if you embarrass the company in front of these people? He glanced nervously at Ethan, who was still standing nearby. Mr. Parker, perhaps one of the professional musicians from the orchestra would be a better choice for— I've made my decision. Ethan cut in smoothly. Sophia will do fine. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to select our piece. He placed a hand lightly on Sophia's elbow, guiding her away from her stammering manager and toward the piano. She was acutely aware of her uniform, the plain black pants and white button-up shirt with the catering company logo embroidered above her heart, a stark contrast to the glittering evening gowns and tailored tuxedos surrounding them. You realize I'm still on the clock? She said quietly as they reached the piano. And I'm not dressed for a performance. Does that matter? Ethan asked, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. You came here to work and now you're working, just doing something different than expected. He glanced up at her. Unless you're having second thoughts? Sophia looked at the beautiful instrument, her fingers itching to touch it. How many times had she pressed her face against the music store window downtown, dreaming of playing something like this instead of the second-hand electric keyboard she'd saved for months to buy. No second thoughts, she decided. But we need to choose something we both know. We don't exactly have time to practice. For the next few minutes, they discussed possibilities, discovering a surprising overlap in their musical backgrounds despite their different paths. Eventually, they settled on a piece that would showcase both their abilities while allowing for some improvisation. I should warn you, Ethan said, as Diane approached to tell them they would be introduced shortly. I'm rather rusty. Sophia doubted that. Men like Ethan Parker didn't allow themselves to become rusty at anything. But she appreciated the attempt to put her at ease. Just follow my lead if you get lost, she said without thinking, then immediately blushed at her presumption. To her surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound that made several nearby guests turn in surprise. I'll hold you to that promise. The MC was calling for attention now, explaining that there had been a change to the evening's program. Ladies and gentlemen, we are incredibly fortunate tonight. Instead of our scheduled pianist, we have an unexpected musical treat. Please welcome to the piano Mr. Ethan Parker, joined by a special guest. Applause filled the room as Ethan led Sophia to the piano bench. She was painfully aware of the confused looks, the whispers, the way some guests squinted to figure out who she was and why she was sitting beside one of the wealthiest young men in the country. They're trying to figure out which foreign conservatory you studied at, Ethan murmured as they took their seats, positioning themselves at opposite ends of the bench. Wait until they realize I'm the same person who served their champagne, she whispered back, earning another small smile from him. As the applause died down, a heavy silence fell over the ballroom. Sophia took a deep breath, suddenly terrified. What if her fingers froze? What if years of playing on her cheap keyboard hadn't prepared her for an instrument of this caliber? She glanced at Ethan, expecting to see the confident businessman who had commanded the situation minutes ago. Instead, she was startled to find uncertainty in his eyes, a vulnerability she wouldn't have expected from someone like him. "It really has been years," he admitted quietly, for her ears only. Something about his honesty steadied her. "Then we'll remind each other how it's done." She counted them in softly, and they began. The first notes were tentative on both sides, Sophia adjusting to the piano's sensitive touch, Ethan remembering movements his fingers hadn't made in too long. But within moments, muscle memory took over. The music flowed between them conversation-like, each responding to the other's phrases and dynamics. Sophia forgot about the crowd, her uniform, the fact that she would probably be fired after this. She forgot about the bills piling up at home, and her siblings waiting for her to bring home leftover food from the event. All that existed was the music and the surprising connection she felt with the stranger beside her, a bridge between their worlds built of melodies and harmonies. When Ethan missed a transition, she seamlessly covered for him, earning a grateful glance. When she embellished a phrase with unexpected grace notes, he matched her creativity in the next passage. They pushed and pulled the tempo together like dancers who had rehearsed for months instead of minutes. Halfway through, Sophia dared to look up at their audience. Where she expected to see boredom or polite tolerance, she instead found rapt attention. Even the servers had paused their duties at the edges of the room, watching with undisguised surprise as one of their own performed alongside a billionaire. In the front row, she spotted her manager's stunned expression and Diane's slow transformation, from horror to wonder, as they realized that Sophia wasn't just managing to keep up. She was playing brilliantly. As they approached the finale, Ethan leaned slightly toward her. "Shall we give them something to remember?" Without waiting for a response, he launched into a more complex variation of the main theme. Sophia grinned and followed his lead, their hands occasionally crossing as they explored the full range of the keyboard. The spontaneous elaboration demanded everything she had learned in her years of study, pushing her to match his unexpected technical flourishes with her own creative responses. When they struck the final chord together, the silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before the room erupted. The applause wasn't the polite, measured response of people who had heard countless charity performances. It was genuine, enthusiastic, with some guests rising to their feet. Sophia sat stunned, her hand still hovering over the keys. Beside her, Ethan looked equally surprised by the reception. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, a wordless understanding passing between them. They had created something unexpected together, something that transcended the vast differences in their lives. As they stood to acknowledge the applause, Sophia noticed several guests holding up phones. Their impromptu performance had been recorded. By tomorrow, she realized, this moment would likely be online for the world to see, the waitress and the billionaire making music together. "Thank you," Ethan said as they bowed, his voice carrying easily over the applause. "But the real thanks belongs to Sophia, who reminded me tonight of something I'd forgotten." He turned to her, offering his hand as they stepped away from the piano. The gesture was simple but profound, an acknowledgement of her as an equal, at least in this moment, in this space. "What happens now?" she whispered as they walked back into the crowd, guests immediately surrounding them with congratulations and questions. "Now," Ethan replied quietly, "we talk about why someone with your talent is serving champagne instead of playing concerts." "Now," Ethan replied quietly, "we talk about why someone with your talent is serving champagne instead of playing concerts." Before Sophia could respond, they were surrounded by guests eager to compliment their performance. Well-dressed women who had barely glanced at her while she carried trays now wanted to know where she had studied. Men who wouldn't have moved aside for her in a hallway earlier were asking if she had recorded any music they could purchase. Through it all, Ethan stayed beside her, his presence both reassuring and bewildering. Why had he singled her out? What could someone like him possibly want from someone like her? "Mr. Parker, that was extraordinary." A silver-haired man in an expensive suit approached them, champagne in hand. "I had no idea you still played. You've been holding out on us at the board meetings." "Thank you, George. It's been a while," Ethan replied politely. "But the credit belongs to my partner here." Sofia Rivera is studying at City College's music program. The man looked at her with new interest. City College? Not Juilliard or Curtis? Sofia felt her cheeks warm. City College offered me a scholarship. Sofia is being modest, Ethan cut in smoothly. She's supporting her family while pursuing her studies. George nodded, though Sofia could see the flicker of dismissal in his eyes, the automatic downgrading of her accomplishments because of where she studied. She was used to it. What she wasn't used to was someone like Ethan Parker noticing and countering it. Well, you two should play together more often, George said, already glancing around for someone more important to speak with. Excuse me, I see the mayor has arrived. As the crowd around them thinned, Diane approached with a tight smile. That was unexpected, but the guests loved it. Mr. Parker, we can't thank you enough for stepping in. It was my pleasure, he replied, though as I said, it was Sofia's idea. Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes when she looked at Sofia. Yes, quite resourceful. Now I'm afraid we need her back at her station. The dinner service is about to begin. Reality crashed back. Sofia was still on the clock, still wearing her server's uniform, still desperately needing this job and its tips. The magical interlude at the piano was over. Of course, she said quickly. I should get back to work. Actually, Ethan interrupted. I'd like Sofia to join me for dinner. Diane blinked rapidly. Join you? But she's staff, Mr. Parker. She's also the reason your musical program was saved, he countered. Consider it her break time. I'm sure your catering team can manage without one server for an hour. The event coordinator looked like she might argue, then thought better of it. No one said no to Ethan Parker, especially not at a charity event where he was likely to make a substantial donation. I'll speak with her supervisor, Diane said tightly before walking away. Sofia turned to Ethan in disbelief. You don't have to do that. I really should get back to work. Are you hungry? He asked. Instead of acknowledging her protest, she hesitated. The truth was she was starving. Catering staff rarely got proper breaks, and when they did, they usually ate whatever leftover scraps they could find in the kitchen. I'll take that as a yes, Ethan said, correctly interpreting her silence. Besides, I owe you a proper conversation after you risked your job to approach me. Before she could formulate another objection, he was guiding her toward the dining area where guests were taking their seats at elegantly decorated tables. Won't people talk? She asked quietly, painfully aware of curious glances following them. The billionaire and the waitress having dinner together sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. Let them talk, he replied with a shrug. They'll find something else to gossip about by dessert. He led her to a small table in a relatively quiet corner of the room. It was meant for two people, but had only been set for one. His assigned seat, she realized. Without hesitation, he signaled a server she recognized from the catering team. The young man hurried over, looking nervously between them. Could we get another place setting, please? Ethan asked politely. Right away, sir, the server replied, though he shot Sofia a confused glance that clearly said, What are you doing sitting down? While they waited, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Now that they weren't united by music, Sofia became acutely aware of how little they had in common. What did someone talk about with a person whose net worth had 9 zeros? Your manager is staring daggers at me from across the room, Ethan observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. I hope I haven't gotten you fired. It wouldn't be the first time, she admitted, then immediately regretted being so candid. His eyebrows rose. You make a habit of challenging billionaires at charity events? No, but I do have a tendency to speak up when I shouldn't. She adjusted the napkin that had been hastily placed in front of her. Last catering job. I corrected a guest who was telling everyone the wrong composer for the background music. Apparently wealthy people don't like being corrected by the help. Ethan laughed softly. No wonder you had the courage to approach me. He studied her with genuine curiosity. Tell me about your studies. How did you end up at City College instead of somewhere like Juilliard? The server returned with her place setting, and soon after the first course arrived. Some kind of delicate soup that probably cost more than Sofia's daily food budget. She waited until they were alone again before answering. Places like Juilliard cost money, even with scholarships. She tasted the soup cautiously. It was delicious. City College offered me a full ride. It was that or no college at all. You're talented enough for the top conservatories, Ethan said. It wasn't flattery, but a simple statement of fact based on what he'd heard her play. Sophia shrugged. Talent only gets you so far when you don't have connections or resources. She immediately bit her lip, afraid she sounded bitter. I'm grateful for City College. The professors are good and I'm learning a lot. But, he prompted, but sometimes I wonder what might have been possible with different circumstances. She stirred her soup absently. My parents were both musicians, not famous but respected in their circles. They taught me from the time I could reach the keys. Everyone thought I'd follow a similar path. What changed? Car accident 2 years ago. She kept her voice steady through practiced control. Dad didn't make it. Mom survived, but with injuries that prevent her from working. I have 2 younger siblings still in high school. Understanding dawned in his eyes. So you became their support. Someone had to. Sophia straightened her shoulders slightly. I still take classes, just fewer than I should. It'll take me longer to graduate, but I'll get there eventually. The main course arrived. Perfectly cooked beef with vegetables arranged like art on the plate. Sophia had served hundreds of similar dishes, but rarely had the opportunity to enjoy one herself. And the keyboard? Do you still practice? Ethan asked after the servers withdrew. On my electric keyboard when I can. Usually late at night after my siblings are asleep. She smiled faintly. The neighbors have complained a few times, even with headphones. Apparently they can hear me hitting the keys too hard. But you never considered giving it up? His question carried unexpected weight, as though her answer mattered to him personally. Sophia looked up from her plate, meeting his gaze directly. Never. Music isn't something I do, it's who I am. I could no more give it up than I could stop breathing. Something flickered across his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or remembrance of feeling the same way once. I did, he said quietly. Give it up, I mean.
Almost entirely. Why?
The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Sorry, that's personal. You don't have to answer. Ethan set down his fork, his food barely touched. No, it's a fair question. The simple answer is that I got busy building the company. 18-hour days don't leave much time for practice. And the complicated answer? He smiled slightly at her persistence. The complicated answer is that I chose a different path. Music was my passion, but technology became my purpose. I convinced myself that I could change more lives through innovation than through performance. And did you? Change lives? Thousands of jobs created. Millions in donations to causes like tonight's. Technologies that help people communicate, learn, connect. He recited these accomplishments with practiced ease, but something in his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. But, she echoed his earlier prompt. Ethan laughed softly. Touché. He considered her question for a moment before answering. But somewhere along the way I lost the joy that made me want to change the world in the first place. The honesty of his admission surprised her. This wasn't the rehearsed response he probably gave to journalists or investors. This was something real. A confession from one musician to another. That's why you agreed to play tonight, she realized. Not just to help with the fundraiser. He nodded. When you approached me, I saw someone who still had what I'd lost, that fire, that conviction that music matters. I was curious, and? What's the verdict? She asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the intensity of his gaze. I think, he said slowly, that we both needed tonight's performance, though for very different reasons. Around them, the charity gala continued. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell. Donations were pledged. But at their small corner table, something significant was happening. 2 people from vastly different worlds were recognizing something essential in each other. A shared understanding that transcended their circumstances. As dessert was served, Ethan leaned forward slightly. I have a proposal for you, Sophia. One that might sound strange, but I hope you'll consider it. She raised an eyebrow, suddenly wary. What kind of proposal? The kind that could change everything, he replied. For both of us. The kind that could change everything, he replied. For both of us. Sophia felt a flutter of unease. She had watched enough movies to know how these scenarios typically played out. Wealthy men making proposals to women with limited options. Despite his kindness tonight, she didn't know this man, not really. She played a few quiet notes, thinking of how it had felt to perform with Ethan. The natural give and take. the way they had instinctively adjusted to each other's style. It had been like a conversation without words, an understanding that transcended their different backgrounds. Her fingers found the melody they had played together, but this time she took it in a new direction, improvising around the theme, exploring what it could become with time and intention, rather than the rushed preparation they'd had at the gala. By the time her siblings' alarms began to ring for school, Sophia had made her decision. She reached for her phone and the business card, taking a deep breath before dialing the number. It rang only once before he answered, as though he'd been waiting for her call despite the early hour. "Sophia?" Ethan's voice sounded different over the phone, less polished, more human. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "And, when do we start rehearsing? When do we start rehearsing?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Ethan laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and pleasure. "How about this afternoon?" "My place at 2. That was how it began. The most unexpected month of Sophia's life. The address Ethan gave her turned out to be a sleek high-rise downtown, with a doorman who eyed her worn jeans and backpack with barely concealed suspicion until Ethan's name was mentioned. Then the man's demeanor changed instantly, ushering her to a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. Sophia had expected luxury, but nothing prepared her for the understated elegance of Ethan's home. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city, making her acutely aware of how small her world had been until now. "You live here alone?" she asked, trying not to gawk at artwork that probably cost more than her family's entire apartment building. "It's a bit much for one person," Ethan admitted, leading her through the open-concept living space. "But I like the light for the piano." The grand piano sat in a corner surrounded by windows, bathed in natural light that made the polished black surface gleam. It was even more impressive than the one at the charity gala, a Steinway concert grand that looked like it belonged on a professional stage. "May I?" she asked, drawn to it like a magnet. "It's why you're here," he replied with a smile. That first day, they spent hours at the piano, discussing possible pieces for the benefit concert, trading ideas and influences, occasionally playing snippets to illustrate a point. Sophia forgot to be intimidated by his wealth or status. At the keyboard, they were simply two musicians with a shared language. As weeks passed, a routine developed. 3 times a week, Sophia would arrive at the penthouse in the afternoon. They would rehearse for hours, stopping only when their fingers tired or when inspiration required a break for discussion. Sometimes Ethan ordered food, and they would eat while talking about music, art, life. Everything except his business or her financial struggles, topics that seemed to exist in another universe. "You never ask about my company," Ethan observed one evening as they shared takeout containers on his balcony. "Most people can't help themselves," Sophia shrugged. "I figure if you wanted to talk about it, you would." She twirled noodles around her fork. "Besides, I didn't come here to network or get business advice. Why did you come?" He asked the question lightly, but she sensed its importance. She considered her answer carefully. "Because when we play together, it feels like everything else falls away. All the labels, all the differences, all the problems waiting for me at home." She glanced at him. "Why did you really invite me?" "Same reason." His honesty surprised her. "And because you weren't afraid to tell a billionaire he was rushing the tempo." They both laughed, remembering the moment in last week's rehearsal when she'd stopped abruptly, turned to him and said, "You're rushing again. The piece needs to breathe here." The piece they'd chosen for the benefit was challenging, a contemporary duet that required both technical precision and emotional depth, with sections for improvisation where they could showcase their unique connection. As the concert date approached, their rehearsals intensified, sometimes lasting well into the evening. One night, after a particularly grueling practice session, Ethan asked a question that caught her off guard. "What will you do after the benefit concert?" Sophia stared at the keys, suddenly reminded that this arrangement had an expiration date. "Go back to my real life, I guess. Classes, catering, taking care of my family." Ethan frowned slightly. "And your music?" "We'll go back to being something I do at night on my keyboard with headphones," she said matter-of-factly. "That's just how it is. It doesn't have to be." He turned to face her fully on the bench. What if there was a way for you to focus on your music full-time? To finish your degree without working 3 jobs? A familiar wariness crept over her. I told you before, I'm not looking for charity. Not charity, he corrected quickly. Investment. In what? In you. In your future. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking less like a polished businessman and more like a nervous musician about to perform. I'm starting a foundation for emerging artists from underserved backgrounds. Musicians who have the talent but not the opportunities or resources. Sophia stared at him. You're creating a foundation. Because of me? You were the catalyst, he admitted. But I've been thinking about it for a while. My company has funded tech startups and innovation incubators, but not the arts. Not the thing that actually saved me when I was younger. Saved you? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the keys without pressing them. My parents had very specific plans for my life, the right schools, the right career, the right kind of success. Music was my escape, the one place where I made my own choices. He smiled faintly, until I didn't anymore. Until I became exactly what they wanted anyway. Understanding dawned on Sophia. His passion for music hadn't simply been set aside for business. It had been sacrificed to expectations, just as she was sacrificing her dreams to necessity. What would this foundation do, exactly? She asked, curiosity overcoming skepticism. Provide scholarships, mentorships, performance opportunities. Help talented musicians focus on their art without worrying about paying rent. He looked at her intently. I'd like you to help design it. To be the first recipient, but also to help identify others who deserve support. It was too much to process. A solution appearing out of nowhere to the problem that had defined her life for the past 2 years. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Ethan replied. After the concert, the night of the benefit arrived with surprising speed. Symphony Hall was intimidatingly grand. Its historic architecture and perfect acoustics a far cry from the practice rooms at City College, where Sophia usually performed. Backstage, surrounded by professional musicians with impressive resumes and expensive instruments, she fought waves of doubt. I don't belong here, she whispered to Ethan as they waited in the wings, listening to a string quartet finish their piece. He looked at her in surprise. Of course you do. You've earned this spot as much as anyone else performing tonight. By serving champagne at the right party, she said with nervous humor. By being brave enough to use your voice when most people stay silent. He squeezed her hand briefly. Remember how we practiced. Just us, the music, and those moments when time seems to stop. When their names were announced, Sophia walked onto the stage feeling as though she were in a dream. The lights were blinding, the audience a shadowy mass beyond the stage. She caught a glimpse of her mother and siblings in the front row. Ethan had arranged special seats for them, before turning her attention to the gleaming piano waiting center stage. As she and Ethan took their places on the bench, a hush fell over the hall. Sophia closed her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself. When she opened them, she caught Ethan's slight nod. Ready when you are. The first notes they played together were tentative, like a question being asked. But soon, the music flowed between them with the familiarity born of weeks of practice and a connection that defied explanation. Unlike their impromptu performance at the gala, this was polished, intentional, yet still alive with spontaneity in the improvisational sections. Sophia forgot about the prestigious venue, the wealthy audience, the critics who might be present. She lost herself in the conversation between their hands, the way the piece built from gentle reflection to passionate intensity and back again. When they reached the final movement, she felt rather than saw Ethan's smile as they navigated the complex rhythms they'd struggled with in rehearsals. The final notes lingered in the perfect acoustics of the hall, and then silence. A heartbeat of collective held breath before the audience erupted in applause. Sophia and Ethan rose together, turning to acknowledge the standing ovation that greeted them. As they took their bows, Sophia caught sight of her mother's face in the front row, tears streaming down her cheeks, hands clapping until they must have hurt. Beside her, Sophia's siblings were beaming with a pride that made her throat tighten with emotion. Backstage, still riding the high of the performance, they were greeted by a crowd of well-wishers, music professors from prestigious conservatories, representatives from recording companies, other performers eager to exchange contact information. They loved you, Ethan murmured as they navigated the crowd together. Just as I knew they would. Later, at the reception following the concert, Sophia found herself surrounded by people who had never given her a second glance when she carried trays at events like this. Now they listened intently as she spoke about her musical influences, her studies, her vision. The foundation will be announcing its first scholarships next month, Ethan was saying to a group that included several major donors. With Sophia, as our artistic director, we'll be identifying promising musicians who might otherwise fall through the cracks of traditional support systems. The title, artistic director, was new, something he hadn't discussed with her yet. She raised an eyebrow at him when the group moved on. Too presumptuous? He asked with a hint of sheepishness. We'll talk about it, she replied, but she was smiling. After I finish my degree, deal. He glanced around the reception, then back at her. You know, all of this happened because you had the courage to ask a stranger to play the keyboard at a party. Sophia considered this, thinking about how differently the evening might have unfolded if she hadn't taken that risk, if she had kept her head down and continued serving champagne, never daring to cross the invisible line between their worlds. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices, she said thoughtfully. One question that changes everything. 6 months later, Sophia stood at the podium in a renovated warehouse that now served as the headquarters for the Harmony Bridge Foundation. Around her, 20 young musicians from across the city, the foundation's first cohort of scholarship recipients, waited expectantly with their instruments. Behind them, a wall of windows overlooked the city skyline, not unlike the view from Ethan's penthouse. But unlike that solitary piano in a lonely apartment, this space hummed with creative energy and possibility. Welcome to your first day, she began, feeling a sense of rightness that had been missing from her life for too long. Each of you is here because someone recognized your talent and your potential, just as someone once recognized mine. Her gaze moved to where Ethan stood quietly at the back of the room, a smile on his face as he watched the dream they had built together come to life. Your backgrounds, your struggles, your journeys, they're all different. But the one thing we all share is that someone, somewhere along the way, said yes instead of no. Someone opened a door instead of closing it. She thought about that night at the charity gala, about the split-second decision to approach a billionaire about playing the keyboard, about how the smallest actions can sometimes lead to the biggest changes. Today, she told the eager faces before her, we start opening doors for each other.